Morning, everyone. It's great to see you here this morning. My name is Sue Wixley. I'm the Director of Communications and Campaigns here at Hospice UK, and I'm a digital immigrant. I'm also an immigrant from South Africa, so an immigrant, but that is certainly not the topic for today. But like many of you, I imagine, some of you, and unlike those who were born digital, I didn't grow up with personal computers or mobile phones. My working life, at least the first part of it, we didn't have emails or mobile phones. We certainly didn't have websites, social media, CRM systems, or any of that. And I guess you will be imagining where you sit in this digital generation game, whether you're a digitally born or a digital immigrant like me. And I think we come at digital technology, these two groups, from different perspectives, which I think is really useful. And it's one of the reasons why it's so important that we work together. And for me, it's one of the reasons why it's so important that we have diverse staff and volunteers as well as trustee boards. So I'm quite passionate about younger trustees, younger people joining trustee boards, and trustee boards being much more mixed and diverse in terms of age. But again, that's not for the session now. What I wanted us to do here this morning with our panel, the purpose of the session this morning is to think about how we, as the hospice sector, as well as we as individual hospices, I think it's a challenge for us at Hospice UK as well, in Hospice House, think about how we are tapping into the power of digital technology. How are we embracing this amazing new possibility, all the opportunities that arise with digital? How are we using it to deliver services differently and maybe better? How are we using digital to perhaps understand our impact better, to meet the need that we've been hearing about, the growing need for hospice care and palliative care that we've been hearing about throughout the conference and again this morning? How we use digital technology to engage and really involve our different audiences. And that's an issue that I'm really passionate and interested in. Clearly, as a communications director and campaigns person, this is something that's particularly interesting, thinking about how we can use digital technology to open up the conversation, to have a conversation with different audiences. So it's less about broadcast and promoting on its own, but it's about actually engaging, having a two-way, three-way, many more way conversation with people. And the challenge of what we're trying to do, say, with Dying Matters and encouraging people to have a wider debate and to think about death and dying and bereavement, much wider issues, digital technology is going to be so key to getting that right and to kind of scaling up to building that conversation. So I'm really excited to have two of the experts in the charity sector here today to talk to us. And I hope, whether we're digital immigrants or born digital, that we can be, in this session at least today and hopefully beyond, be digital explorers, that we can think together about how we can make more of digital in our organizations. I thought I would say, before I introduce a panel and talk a bit about the way we're going to run the session this morning, I thought I would just give you a quick definition. It's my definition, and I'm sure we'll hear definitions later from Jo as well as Zoe, and you guys might have your own thoughts on what digital technology is and what digital leadership and digital transformation, these various buzzwords, really mean and what they mean to you. And it's probably up to you to work out in your own organization what it means. But for me, and perhaps it's because digital is so new to some people, it's both exciting but also scary. I thought it's useful to just start with a bit of a definition. And the one I quite like is from The Guardian, and it talks about digital technology in the broadest sense, that it's about connecting people and machines with each other and with data. So it's about thinking about digital in the broadest way and how it connects people and machines and data. And so, yes, it is about social media. Yes, it is about websites and CRM systems and SEO and lots of other acronyms. But really, it's about connections between people. It's about how systems work in organizations. And it's about what we're trying to achieve with the digital, with this technology in the first place. So while it's quite easy to get hung up on the tech and the complex and the exciting new apps and possibilities, I think it has to, in the end, come down to people and to how we work together. So just to talk briefly about the panel, our two speakers are going to share their perspectives about digital from slightly different aspects, talking about what trustees and boards should be thinking about in terms of digital, and then also looking at what success looks like, and the idea of digital maturity as one way of thinking about embracing digital in your organization, and you'll hear much more about that from the speakers, obviously. During the session, I'd be keen for you to share your questions on Twitter, and then later on, I really look forward to hearing your thoughts and comments as well as questions. I thought we would run the session by first hearing from Zoe and taking some questions, and then hearing from Jo and taking some questions, and then I'll open it up much more broadly, just to help us to process the various ideas and thinking that we will be hearing. So I'm going to introduce my first speaker, Zoe Amar, who really is regarded as one of the charity sector's leading digital experts. She arrived last night straight from the Charity Comms Award, where she won an Inspiring Communicators Award. So we are really lucky to have her here today. Zoe Amar set up Zoe Amar Communications in 2013. She's worked with lots of clients, from breast cancer care to the School for Social Entrepreneurs. She has written tons of really amazingly useful data, useful documents, toolkits, guidelines, blogs. And if you're not following her on Twitter, and if you haven't joined Twitter, this is a good place to start. Zoe is also changing the way, I think, is really changing the way and transforming the way the sector thinks about digital through things like an award series that she set up called Social CEOs, which she set up with a colleague. And that's really driving good practice and making the rest of us look at and learn from people who are doing really interesting things on social media. Zoe is a trustee of Future Care Capital, and she sits on the board Audit and Risk Subcommittee of Samaritan, so she brings that trustee experience as well. Zoe.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Sue, for that incredibly kind introduction. This morning we're going to be looking at some key issues around what digital actually is, where the sector is at with digital, and also how to convince your leaders about digital as well. So firstly, what I would like to do, because obviously you've had several really exciting days at this conference, I've been following what's going on, it has looked wonderful. I think it would be great to get you to learn a little bit more from each other about where you are at with digital. So you talked about the amazing opportunities for your sector in digital. So I'm going to give you just 1 minute to talk to the person next to you about what excites you about digital, and then we'll take a bit of feedback before we get into the meat of the session. So off you go. Okay, great. So I can see lots of really good discussion going on, which is wonderful. Let's take some feedback from a couple of people. So who would like to tell me what really excites them about digital?
Okay. I'm Diane Parks. I head up the brand and media team at John Taylor Hospice. And what we were just talking about is what we really love about digital is it allows us to show people who are not in our hospice, who are not taking part in our activities, what we're doing every day. So anybody who follows us on Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn knows things that are happening. It might be something really simple, like one of our staff serving up Christmas pudding at a Christmas party, but we can share that directly with them whenever we want to, and that's what we love about digital.
I think that's such a great summary of the power of digital, how you can get your supporters to really understand what you're doing every day. And I think this is such a key thing for the charity sector, and in particular the hospice sector as well. There is such extraordinary power and the amazing and phenomenal things that you are all doing every single day, and getting more people and more donors to understand what you're doing and how you're making a difference is not just wonderful, I think it's really empowering for you all as well. Thank you. That's a really brilliant first contribution. Can I have one more person tell me what excites them about digital? Who's a volunteer? Gentleman here. Great, thank you.
Are we on?
Yes, go for
My
it.
name's Michael Crowther. I'm Chief Executive at Kirkwood Hospice, which is West Yorkshire, a place called Huddersfield. We're in the Premier League now, so everybody knows who we are.
Hooray.
But the thing about digital is that you might not know that Huddersfield is famous for something called the Luddites. So the Luddites were people who used to, in the Industrial Revolution, march around the streets breaking machines that were taking away people's jobs. So you wouldn't think we were embracing digital that well from Huddersfield. But we're really excited about what digital can bring to our organisation, but we're more interested in not just digital for digital's sake, but actually how it inspires the action in our community that will help sustain our hospice in the future. So how does it inspire people to continue to support us in different ways and actually take action? How does it actually motivate people to seek out the help that they need when they need it from us?
I think that's brilliant, and that's absolutely right. It's never just about using the channels, it's about what you want people to do once they've experienced what you're saying and your presence on the channel. So that's great. Brilliant. Thank you very much. So 2 super contributions there about demonstrating your impact, demystifying what you do, and also ultimately building a bigger community of supporters. So let's crack on and look at what we're going to be covering today. So we've got quite a packed session from me, then we're going to hear some great stuff from Jo as well. I'm going to look at what digital means and why it matters. Inevitably you'll find in your organisation people saying, well, what does digital really mean? So we're going to have a look at that. We're going to look at why your leadership team need to support and care about digital. We'll look at how digital fits in with strategy. We will also have a look at how you can manage risk, which I know is a very big question for many charities and hospices as well. And then I'm going to give you a quick 7-point checklist of how you can progress with digital. Okay, so what is digital and why should it matter to your board and leadership team? So 99% of my job is pretty much going in and talking to boards, talking to CEOs, talking to executive teams about digital. And inevitably, one of the first questions is, well, what is digital? And if you talked about this in your organisation, you will find that most people have a different definition. So for what it's worth, I would like to share some definitions that came from a group of charity leaders. Last year, I co-founded a digital leadership programme, which we run in partnership with the School for Social Entrepreneurs. And the people who come on that, they're an amazing group of charity and social enterprise leaders. And the first thing we do when they get through the door is ask them to define what they think digital is. And these are 4 definitions that came from a recent cohort. And I think these definitions really reflect the breadth of everything that's involved in digital. And as Sue was rightly saying, it's not just about the channels, it's about what you can actually do with the channels and how you can really make a difference and get people to look at your organisation in a fundamentally different way. And I think what I really like about these definitions, particularly the third one down, is that it isn't just about going on Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn, useful though those channels are. It's actually about the behaviours behind how you would actually use those channels in order to achieve your organisation goals. This is a fundamental shift in the way we're all living and working and communicating, and I think that's what's so incredibly exciting about digital. Okay, so you will have heard over the last year or so, everyone seems to be talking about digital transformation. But actually, if you look at lots of content out there about digital transformation, it's a bit light on what digital transformation actually means. So I have written a definition. Here it is. I'm just going to go through it briefly to explain all the different things that I've put in there because it's quite packed. What I would always say about digital transformation is that ultimately what you are aiming for is for digital to become integrated into your organisation. So if you're doing some fantastic stuff face-to-face, and I'm sure lots of you are, I don't advocate digital actually replacing that. I think digital is very much there to augment and complement what you're doing, but inevitably it's going to bring some exciting new opportunities, perhaps about digital service delivery or fundraising or reaching more people. So it's ultimately very much about integrating it into what you are doing. And then one thing that I hear a lot in our work is when I talk to CEOs or trustees, they say, well, you know, I get that we need to do this, but where on earth do we start? And I think the key place where you need to go is to go back to your vision and your mission and your organisational strategy, because that is where all the answers are for what you are trying to do with digital. And it was interesting last night, I was talking to Mark Atkinson from Scope at the awards, and I was saying, how did you decide to go through this enormous transformation that they are currently going through? It's very much business transformation. And he's saying, we just went back to our core purpose. We looked at what our vision and mission is. So that is where you really need to start with when you are embarking on this journey. And ultimately, I believe it really has to be about creating value. And obviously that takes a number of different forms. So it could be fundraising, it could be developing more corporate partnerships, it could even be being more widely acknowledged for the influence and the expertise that you have. You will know best what it means in terms of generating value for your organisation. But I'd encourage you to think really broadly about what you want to achieve from embarking on this journey and then work backwards on that. And then coming back to this point about integration, I think in order to use digital really effectively, you're aiming to give your audience a really good, really joined up experience, both on and offline. And that's why I've put the point in here about giving them a great experience. It needs to feel seamless and frictionless, ideally. And then finally, and this is a point we don't talk about very much in the charity sector, you do need to think about how digital is going to give you competitive advantage. And by that, I'm not advocating that you become super cutthroat or you push other organisations out of the way to get ahead. What I mean by that is that we all know that the charity sector is going through a really challenging time at the moment, as is the rest of the world. And the more you can do in order to use digital in order to put your organisation in the best possible position to face all of these challenges and whatever the future can throw at it, the better. Okay, so if you have any colleagues who are still not convinced about digital, please do show them these stats. So why does it matter, believe it or not? I still go out and talk to organisations occasionally who say, well, it's just not relevant to us. I don't really understand that argument, because even in the next 60 seconds, you can see the amount of things that are happening online. 3.8 million Google searches will be made, 448,000 tweets will be sent, 29 million WhatsApp messages. That's probably my mother sending a lot of messages there. She's just discovered the joys of WhatsApp. So just the amount of content there is out there and the sheer reliance we have as a society on all of these channels, I think shows why it's incredibly relevant and important to all of us. And you may still have colleagues who are perhaps not convinced. And if they are still not convinced, I would show them this data. So this comes from We Are Social, who do a brilliant, I think it's a quarterly survey of where the world is at with use of digital. And you can see here that use of internet, use of social media, use of smartphones, you know, we're looking at quite high penetration levels now. That is only going to grow. Again, I don't know how any organisation can look at this and say digital is not relevant to us. So this is a nice set of punchy stats to put in front of anyone in your organisation who's still not quite convinced yet. Okay, so consequences of not embracing digital. So there's some really interesting data that came out from the Lloyd's UK Business Digital Index. Put your hand up for me if you saw this recently, a few weeks ago. not many people. It's worth having a look at. So they do a really good yearly survey of where charities and also SMEs are at with digital. And this year it revealed some really interesting findings. So digitally mature organisations are twice as likely to report an increase in donations. With use of social media, that's going to lead to an increase in fundraising as well, which I think is very interesting because there have been some debates in the sector about the ROI on social media. And digitally capable charities are more likely to save money and to save time. So if you talk about digital with your CEO, with your board, you know, what's not to like about all of this stuff? Because if it means you're going to save money, you're going to save time, and also you're going to be in a better position to fundraise. Again, I think that puts you in a really, really good position for all the challenges everyone will inevitably face over the next few years. I just want to talk a little bit about some of this data. We mapped where the charity sector is at with digital earlier this year in the Charity Digital Skills Report. Some of you may have seen this already, so I'm just going to recap on the highlights. I do just want to say that we are going to do this report again. That's been confirmed over the last few days, so watch out for that. That will be out there in the spring. A really, really big feature of the report was that charities are crying out for more digital leadership. They want their boards and their leadership teams to develop their digital skills. Otherwise, they're worried about the impact on losing out on digital fundraising, losing ground to competitors, becoming irrelevant. I mean, try making a case for support when you're no longer seen as relevant. Virtually impossible. So I think this highlights some really interesting trends about how charities see themselves if they don't start to move forward with digital. What I'd like you to do now, and again in the spirit of learning from each other, so I've developed a framework, which you can see here, to get a bit of a finger in the air understanding of where your organisation is at with digital. Couch to 5K is obviously starting out. Marathon's kind of in the middle now, making some progress, and Olympian's obviously the holy grail, and not everyone may be there yet. Having said that, though, I talked about this with a group of communicators this week, and most of them seem to be in the Olympian category, which I was surprised and delighted by. I'd like to do a show of hands, actually. So who thinks their organisation would be in the couch to 5K category? So probably maybe 10% of you, perhaps, if that's great. Marathon, who thinks their organisation's in the marathon category? Oh, a few more of you. Good, good. And who thinks they're in the Olympian category? Anyone out there think they're in the Olympian category? Perhaps this time next year. So something to aim for, I think. And what I think is particularly interesting about the Olympian category is it highlights how digital is a real challenge to charities' notion of risk. And I'm particularly conscious of this, having been a trustee for quite a long time. A lot of the data out there, if you look at the stuff that McKinsey have been doing, they do a lot of very good research into digital maturity, shows that organisations who are willing to take more risks, who are willing to try new things out, are more likely to get better return on investment from digital. And I think that is really hard for charities because charities quite often won't have an innovation budget. And of course, obviously, you know, in the wake of Kids Company, we're all pretty risk averse, aren't we, as trustees? And that's a continual tension that we have to work through on the board that I sit on. But what I would say there is the more you can just encourage your organisation to keep trying out new things, even if they're small, low risk, low cost things, to get them into this mindset of just testing and learning and improving, which is so fundamental for this different way of things, a different way of working that comes with digital, then that is going to increase their comfort zone and it's going to make them much more confident with these channels. Okay, so how does digital fit in with strategy? So I think what's quite interesting is that obviously digital's come into a lot of organisations and not just charities from the kind of ground up. It's often entered into organisations through marketing. So traditionally it's sat here at the bottom of the pyramid. But this is changing now, and I think that's entirely right. And in fact, if you look at an organisation like Parkinson's UK, with their digital directorate, who would sit here in the middle middle of the pyramid, they've got quite a lot of roles that one would call kind of offline, so perhaps kind of press roles, reporting into digital, and that's quite an interesting shift. And ultimately, I think we'll get to a point where digital will sort of move into organisational strategy, which frankly is where it should be. But it's only possible to do that once your organisation is digitally mature, in my view. This is where the world is going. So how can you prepare for your digital strategy? And I think organisations don't always realise the amount of groundwork there is to do, so I just want to break it down and make it manageable, so demystify it for you here today. The first thing is you need to do some thinking, and I recommend doing this with the board, with the executive team, on where you're trying to go with all of this. What is your ultimate digital vision? Is it about reaching more supporters? Is it about doing something incredibly exciting and transformative and different through digital service delivery? Is it about being much more widely recognised for your expertise? It could be a number of different things, but the point is you need to have that conversation internally about where you're going with all of this stuff so that you can get people excited and galvanised about how they can use these channels. And again, because digital can feel like a very unwieldy, unmanageable, scary thing if you're new to it, I think it's so important to break the process down into a series of manageable steps. So having a roadmap of the headline activities you're going to do and the milestones, the more you can demystify all of this stuff and make it practical and easy to follow and a lot less scary, as Sue was talking about the fear earlier, I think that's absolutely right. And then I think a very important tool as part of this stuff is to really, really understand your audience. And that's got to be your starting point in so many ways. So really profiling your users and your supporters and who you're trying to reach. And then understanding the different points at which you can help them on and offline. And their pain points and their goals and what they're thinking and feeling and doing at each key stage. And actually, I think that's a fundamentally really important tool for helping your board and your executive team understand the organisation from the perspective of the people that you're trying to reach. Culture change is a really underestimated part of all of this stuff. So again, thinking how are we going to be thinking and behaving, and what our values are, how they're going to look different, perhaps a year or two down the line once you've been through all of this. And then understanding what digital skills you have in the building. I think that's incredibly important. I know Jo's probably going to touch on all of that later. But so often I find that organisations either really underestimate the kinds of digital skills that they have, or they overestimate them. And until you have a baseline of the kinds of expertise that you have in the building, whether it's high or whether it's low, it's really hard to move forward. And then finally, what I'd recommend is that you need to make sure that you understand other organisations in the same space, how they're using digital, so whether it's comms, whether it's service delivery, it's fundraising, even stuff they're using to make themselves more efficient with digital, looking at that right across the piece. And then comparing yourselves against that as well, so you understand where you are and how you compare. Knowledge is power, data is power in all of these things. I want to say a bit about managing risk. Now, it's interesting, I was with a group of charity trustees earlier this week talking about this very issue, and I shared with them a technique which I'm going to share with you now. I think inevitably when you start talking about the risks that come with digital to a group of senior people, everyone gets quite antsy and nervous and anxious, don't they, very understandably. But this is something which I found worked really, really well. So you just sit down with them, you imagine you've been through this whole digital transformation process, it's a year down the line, and you imagine that the whole thing has just gone horribly wrong, like really, really, really wrong. And then you work back from what all of the individual risks are. So could it be something like you've lost a key member of staff, or your CEO just hasn't understood it or failed to sponsor it, or you've overspent on a website, or all the other things that can just go horribly, horribly pear-shaped. And I find that once you sit down and you have that conversation with senior people, then it really increases their confidence because you're making the risk much more tangible and understandable. And it will throw up lots of areas for conversation that you haven't actually considered before. So I recommend doing this, the pre-mortem. It's a really effective technique. And then just some other issues to consider. Again, following on from risk, the more you can understand what could potentially go wrong and perhaps running some simulations, that's something I've done with quite a few charities. That can work very effectively because, again, you're going through the process and you think, well, if we can deal with this, frankly, we can deal with anything. Everyone's much clearer on what they're doing. Do also consider what you might need to do in the way of policies and your processes, infrastructure and your kit as well. You can have a great digital strategy, but if your servers are falling apart and you're at risk of some terrible cybersecurity breaches, then obviously nothing's really going to work. Data protection is obviously such a big issue at the moment. And then really keeping an eye on your competitors as well, and I think this is such a hot issue in the charity sector at the moment. You might find that the organisations who are in the same space as you a year or so ago are actually fundamentally shifting or moving forward with all this stuff, and you may even have competitors who aren't just in your sector, so that's also something to consider. And then a very big issue, I think, is how we retain and attract talent, so thinking about how you can look at your recruitment process to attract really great people with good digital skills. So I'm just going to end on 7 key things that you should do, and these apply whether your organisation is large or small. So the first thing is to work out where you want to play, what you want to prioritise. So are you going to focus on fundraising? Are you going to focus on skilling up your people? I really think that the key to a successful digital transformation is perhaps focusing on 3 or 4 just really core areas and doing those really, really well, rather than going after 8 or 10 things where no one has the resource to do that really effectively. Think about your digital fundraising model. I'm having so many conversations with organisations at the moment where they want to do more digital fundraising, and that's great. Obviously, you need to think through all the different elements that go with that, whether it's your aftercare programme, whether it's acquisition of supporters, how you keep that community warm as well. There's an incredible amount of content and stewardship, and of course so many regulatory aspects as well. So making sure you've got that process nailed is key. Upskilling your team, clearly, we've talked about that. Your people are your most important asset. Time and again, what I see is that the people are the ones who are the real deal breaker in this situation and can make the difference between success and failure. Keep an eye on how your audience is using digital as well, because again, that can shift fundamentally. You might find that your assumptions have changed even over the last 6 months. Talk to people who've done it. What I love about this sector is that you can just go and talk to people who've been on this journey already and find out from them what they've learned, what they wish they knew in the start. And you might have to act a bit like a coach to your executive team as well, particularly if they're nervous about this stuff. So getting them to understand it's doable and it's manageable and it doesn't have to cost the earth. And then finally, and the most important thing is just get started. Just get on with it. Honestly, the worst thing you can do is just sit there and wait another 6 months or a year, because these things are only going to get more and more embedded in the way we're all living and working. So the more you can just crack on, even just try some small things and pilot them, the more it's going to accelerate your journey towards using digital really well. So we've looked at risk, we've looked at where digital sits, and we've looked at 7 things that you need to do. Thank you so much for listening. We've got lots of digital resources on our site, as Sue mentioned. Thank you very much, and I'd love to take some questions now.
And perhaps go to the fixed mic, so we just point out the... Yes. So the mic 1.
I'm Ryan Campbell, I'm Chief Executive of Demelza Children's Hospice. And we're really excited about digital in the way that we can tell stories, but particularly actually how people can tell us stories and talk to each other. But my question, and it's thinking through this as a leader, although the organisation and myself are very excited about the possibilities of digital, I was wondering how much you see it as a sort of personal characteristic or an essential personal characteristic for a leader. because I find Twitter and Facebook really boring and can't be bothered. Am I failing as a leader because of that?
No, I don't think you're failing as a leader at all. I think these channels can feel a bit unnerving once you're getting used to them. But I think you've raised a really fundamental question there about characteristics. And I think there are 4 things I've seen really develop as leaders develop, improve with digital. So the first thing is confidence, and you need to find something that increases your confidence as a leader with digital. So, you know, I really felt that excitement when you first came to the microphone, you were talking about it. So you will know what is making you excited about this stuff. So go back to that and think about how you can do more of it. I think the second characteristic I see in leaders is about understanding. So this is where the skills point is so important. And then the third thing is about attitude. And to me, that's very much about curiosity and trying new things and just leading from the front on helping your team understand that a bit of failure is nothing to be scared of. It's actually just data which you can learn from. And then that final point, again, is about that understanding as well. So making sure that you're really excited about it and the motivation as well. So again, that sense of bringing your team with you and what's getting you out of bed in the morning about doing this stuff, what's motivating you to do it. Perhaps it's about delivering what your charity is doing even more effectively. So demonstrating that motivation and understanding it and how you can really model it as a leader, I think is vital. Thank you.
There's a question number 2, and then I might take one from Jamie if there are some questions on Twitter. And then we'll move on and hear from Jo, and there'll be time for questions again in a bit.
Great, thank you.
Hi.
Hello.
Barbara Gale, Chief Exec, St Nicholas Hospice Care. We try and use digital a lot, but I think the area that's really we're not looking at enough is actually in relation to the care and support we give, how we empower, how we give people information, how we use YouTube, how we sort of teach people how they can help themselves, how we help people connect. And I think there's this big fear and worry about risk and confidentiality and data protection. And I think they're all things that we could get round. And we heard Ros Taylor talking about supporting a person through text and WhatsApp. And I think we've got to be braver and try and just say, how do we sort this out and how do we get permission? Because that's why we communicate through text and WhatsApp. Why can't we do our care and support people with that as well?
I think that's an excellent question. I think what you need to do there, because I think what you've touched on, an issue I'm sure lots of people in the room have been thinking about as well, is how you can effectively provide more support and do what you do as a hospice even more effectively using digital as well as obviously with your offline channels. I think the starting point for that is always for me about the user journeys. So understanding some of your kind of typical supporters, patients who you're trying to reach, you know, you would profile them in a lot of detail, and we call that personas, and then mapping out how you can help them at each key stage. So as you rightly said, where they need advice, where they need information, where they need support, where they need hand-holding, where they need guidance. If you map out all of those points where they need help, their pain points, their problems, their goals, what they're thinking, feeling, doing at each stage, then that's going to unlock all of those different points at which you can help people, because inevitably you're going to have to prioritise which channels you use and when. So I think you can do that fairly easily actually based on a lot of the data that you've got in your organisation. So yeah, sounds really exciting. Good stuff.
Thank you. And one last question in this round from Jamie. Jamie?
Good morning. My name's Steve Mellish, from trustee from Garden House Hospice. Hospice care. Thanks for the great presentation on sort of looking ahead in the digital world. One of the things that, I'm interested to know is, do you have any sort of information or somewhere to go where you can see what a good, effective digital strategy might look like from, you know, the couch to 5K to the end of the marathon, heading towards Olympian? And also, there's a real challenge in terms of trying to introduce another sort of element of strategy into sort of a health and clinical, focused organisation. And I say this because I've only been a trustee about 18 months, and I'm not from a health or clinical background.
So I think there's two really interesting points there. So the first thing about what does a good digital strategy look like? So whether you're just starting out or whether you're at the Olympian level, the process is broadly the same. We need the fundamental principles in there. If you go onto our site under resources, there's a charity digital toolkit, which is absolutely free. And then there's a section in there on digital strategy. So I would take a look at that. And I think it would be quite interesting once you've developed that to sense check it periodically against that framework that I showed you earlier to determine where you are in that process and just to think about all those different elements as well. So there's a good framework there. And then the second point you mentioned about integrating digital into your strategy and also about traditional health and social care environment. I'm sensing what's behind that question, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's about getting that buy-in perhaps from people who don't have so much of a digital background. Is that right? Yes, I'm nodding. Great. So this is why I mentioned that checklist earlier on in the presentation. So the more you can get people, perhaps who don't have a digital background, to understand your audience and your supporters and the different points at which you could help them with digital, and just to show them some of the business case stuff for digital, which I went through earlier as well. I think those two things could be quite persuasive, and in fact I've seen them work really effectively in getting those people on side.
Fabulous. Thank you, Zoe. I sense there are quite a few more questions, but I'm going to leave them to the end so we can spend enough time listening to Jo. So thank you, Zoe. That was practical, strategic, inspiring, really helpful. Thank you very much. So I'm going to introduce Jo Wolfe, who is the MD for London of Reason Digital, which is a digital agency. She has 10 years' experience as a digital leader in the charity sector, most recently working as Assistant Director of Digital for Breast Cancer Care, and it was in that role that she developed something that I found really unbelievably useful, the Digital Maturity Index, which she will talk about a bit later. She's also worked at Girl Guiding, V Inspired, and Action on hearing loss, where she's also been involved in digital projects. She's a trustee at Sadler's Wells, and was recently named as one of the inspiring women in charity digital by the Third Sector. Congratulations. And in 2014 was voted #1 woman in digital under 30 by the Drum marketing publication. So we're really lucky to have Jo here, and I invite you to join us. Thank you.
This is a big stage. It's exciting. How are we all feeling? Is everyone enthusiastic, ready to go? I was in Japan earlier this year, and we used to do something at the beginning of the session. So this was a bit of a work trip to Japan, and at the beginning of each session that we did, we had to show our enthusiasm and energy levels to the person presenting, and we had to do either thumbs up if we were really energized, thumbs to the side if we were like kind of so-so, and thumbs down if we were low energy. So given that it's the morning, where are we seeing our thumbs right now? Are we thumbs up? Anyone there's a grumpy guy here. Someone's got his thumbs right down. Well, we'll try and turn that around, shall we? As we go through and get the energy up. Anyway, thank you so much, Sue, for asking me today and for the great introduction. And I think it's brilliant. I love working with Zoe in the sector, and so much of what we say aligns with each other. So, hopefully this kind of follows on quite nicely from what Zoe was saying as well. So a little bit, very briefly, about Reason Digital. We do good through digital. We're a social enterprise. We only work for pro-social organisations, charities, social enterprises, housing associations, including quite a lot of work with hospices as well. And we have a very exciting book called the Digital Fundraising Book. So if you've been inspired by what Zoe said and you're interested in trying out digital fundraising, this might be the book for you. I'm very thrilled to say it is free for anyone who's here today. There's been a bit of a backlog in requests for the digital fundraising book, but I've been assured that stocks have been renewed, and anybody who would like one for free only needs to tweet me or email me after the session, and I can get one sent out to you. You don't even have to pay for the postage, so it's better than Amazon. I suppose not Amazon Prime. Anyway, this is an exciting offer. So moving on, I think there's like some animation in that slide that always confuses me. The future is here. I think we should all be quite excited about this, given the opportunities that Zoe's talked to us about. But let's be honest, it can feel a little bit scary sometimes too. Hopefully the fact that you've come to this session on digital this morning means that you're not too afraid of the opportunities around digital. But has anyone got any concerns? They're still a little bit worried maybe? Anyone feeling some concerns? The grumpy guy at the front is quite worried as well. Yeah. And actually, yeah, that's the worry, isn't it? That rather than digital being the area of concern, it is the charity sector itself and our lack of response to digital that is the worrying thing and the scary thing that we do need to be concerned about. It's a really good point. I'd say there's safety in numbers. And, you know, don't think that we would have this level of engagement and this level of collaboration and cooperation in other sectors at all. I think it's a huge asset of the charity sector more broadly and specific hospices in particular, where, you know, we can come together, we can share on these things, we can be quite open, we can talk about the skills of our boards, the skills of our staff teams, our resources. That's really brave, actually, to be able to talk about that and to be able to share. And what I'm going to particularly talk about in going on with the digital maturity matrix is an example of where sharing has been to our strength, particularly within the sector. And there's such potential to do great things using digital. I don't normally share masses of case studies in this presentation, but I do have 3 particular gems that I think are relevant to you guys that show the great potential of digital. The first one is a platform called Health Unlocked that's been developed through digital innovation funding in the NHS, but it is a for-profit company. Has anyone here heard of Health Unlocked? It's a peer support tool that allows you to set up your own communities. So rather than having to build separate discussion forums to help your beneficiaries talk to each other, you can actually set up communities within Health Unlocked, and then different communities can interchange between each other. So people who maybe are talking about end-of-life care could also be having parallel conversations on other comorbidities, other areas maybe around sort of, health and well-being and other areas there. So really, really interesting. The second is another startup called Farewell, and this is an organisation that's been set up to make making a will really easy, because lots of people find that difficult, something that they don't do. Digital is enabling people to do this really, really quickly and easily, which is amazing. And the third one is something from Reason Digital. We developed an app called Gone for Good. Gone for Good is a charity shop donation app. So it's kind of the Uber of donating to a charity. Click one button on your phone and you can have your goods picked up really easily. You don't have to arrange any of that yourself. So it takes the hassle out of using a charity shop. And we've got lots of charities and hospices that already use that app. So thinking about how we might bring some of that inspiration from wider, maybe slightly wider than the core charity sector, but how do we bring some of that inspiration of digital maturity to your organisations? Well, I really believe that as well as setting up a digital strategy, or as part of setting up that strategy, we really need to measure where we are currently with digital to be able to set those goals for the future and really look at moving forward. Unless we're able to look very critically at our current state, how are we going to be able to set those future goals and imagine that future state that we're moving towards of being more digitally mature? So this is why, along with colleagues at Breast Cancer Care, I established the third sector digital maturity matrix about 18 months ago. It's really easy to find. If you want to find digital maturity matrix, you can just search for it on Google or go to digitalmaturity.co.uk. It's there, it's available for free, and it's been used by nearly 800 charities and counting. And it's really interesting looking at the stats on this of where in the world different people are coming from. We're very big in Australia, apparently, so that is nice. They've not invited me over for any conferences there, though, so still waiting for that invite. We piloted the tool initially. We were at Breast Cancer Care. We piloted it with MSF, Diabetes UK and Stroke Association. So not only was it developed in one charity, we also worked across those other charities to make sure all of the statements and all of the content within the tool actually works across the whole of the sector, which is really important. And what does the matrix examine? So it works across 8 dimensions. The really fundamental, foundational things like technology, governance, and also some of the more content-generated things and the user experience of your digital channels. Also thinking about how do you measure and track the success of your digital offer around the analytics piece as well. And really, if you consider all of those aspects, those are the aspects that should form fundamental parts of your digital strategy as well. So once you've used the matrix to assess your current state, that's going to allow you to start mapping out that digital strategy. So it's kind of a 2-for-1 deal in a way. But really important to remember, it's subjective. When Breast Cancer Care first assessed their digital maturity, we got 31%. We can see that when other organisations use the tool, they can get radically higher than that. And when I might assess that from an outside perspective, I might say, well, really, are those guys a lot better than where Breast Cancer Care were at the beginning of their journey? And that's to say, really, you know, if you want to go on, use the maturity matrix and give yourself 100%, you can do. It's a subjective tool, but that's not going to necessarily help you improve your digital maturity. So how did Breast Cancer Care increase digital maturity? Picking up again on something that Zoe said, you know, we didn't choose 20 things. We could have chosen 20 things to do that would have helped us improve our strategy, but it's really important for us to be very focused. So we concentrated mainly on these 4 things to improve digital maturity, and those things might be different across other organisations, although these are kind of fairly you know, top level areas that might align to your organisations as well. The first thing that we did was to build on our digital skills and inspire a digital culture. And that actually did involve, at some points, virtual reality headsets. Because I think it's really important to show people the great, exciting, cool things you can do with digital, while also teaching them some of the fundamental, foundational skills, like how to write for the web, how to send emails and email marketing systems, how to make the most of social media. Those were all things that we taught everyone at Breast Cancer Care how to do. The second was to become data-driven, really test and learn around a digital offer and create a cycle of continuous improvement in what we did. So what I mean by that is that rather than investing a huge amount of money at one point in our website, for example, and other digital products, we drip-fed that investment over time. We tested things out, we learned from that, and then we went on to deliver more in terms of our digital offer. So it's very much a measured approach to how we developed that digital piece. The third thing is to really think about innovation as a business as usual. And someone mentioned as part of their question the need to look at digital innovation within service delivery. And we developed an app for women moving forward after breast cancer. And that added to our stable of digital service products, which already included an online discussion peer support forum. So really thinking about how people want to access services nowadays, it's almost analogous to where you do your supermarket shop. Sometimes you want to use Waitrose, other times you want to use Ocado. I mean, I'll admit I've come up from London today. Sometimes you want to use Morrison's, let's be honest, but I think the example is Waitrose versus Ocado. Both are equally valid. Sometimes you want to find online services, sometimes you want to find the offline face-to-face services, and both are equally valid. It just depends where you're at that point in time. And the fourth thing that we did, which was really important, was to invest in our digital content. I find it staggering that the reason that people use the web essentially is to find out information, to share information, to discuss things. That is all content. Whether we view videos, we listen to podcasts, we look at photos on Instagram, that is all content. So if we don't invest in how we develop and share that content, then we're going to miss out on those opportunities. And someone else mentioned that storytelling element, and that's all where content can really help us. And by investing in content, Breast Cancer Care improved its search results through organic search. We drove 25% more traffic from search engines like Google than we had before. So there was real monetary value in investing in that content. So those were four things that we did, four big areas that we tackled to increase our digital maturity from 31% to 56%. I'll tell you now, we didn't quite meet that goal. We actually got 55% after a year. So we nearly got it, and it's how you know I'm honest, that I could have just said we got the 56%. We actually got 55%, but that's still pretty good. And the team at Breast Cancer Care are still working on it, and their next target to increase digital maturity is 74%. So hopefully they will get there a year from setting that goal, which was a few months ago. Now, I wanted to share some stats about the sector as a whole. So the first thing to say is that I mentioned, it's subjective, so this is aggregating this data. There's going to be people who are maybe overinflating their results, but we can see that it's a fairly confident sector. We currently say that our digital maturity is 50% with a very ambitious, very confident target of 88%. So people wanting to really drive forward that digital maturity, which is great to see. Governance, campaigns and content are the most mature areas. So those are the areas we think we're doing best in. And unfortunately, user experience, analytics and technology are more challenging areas. And these really are the areas where we need more specialist skills. So it makes sense, those skills are more expensive. It's really costly to hire developers, and not many charities can afford to have developers on staff or to afford development work to the digital products. So that's why probably those areas are lagging slightly behind. And you know, potentially an obvious thing, but the larger the digital team, the higher an organisation's maturity as well. So we compared digital teams where there's maybe 1 to 4 people with digital teams where there are over 11 people, and perhaps unsurprisingly, an organisation with a bigger digital team is more digitally mature. When you get that comparison, your analytics, technology and user experience scores are the ones that are likely to be higher. And remember, those are the areas which, as a sector, we're doing worse in. So if you really want to make an impact in those areas, think about what skills you can bring into your digital team in order to boost those up, because that's where the change is really going to come from. Now, I would love to do the mini maturity assessment with you now, but I don't know if we're going to have quite enough time. Do we have another?
How long do you think it will take?
We can do it in 5 or less.
Yeah, I think
yeah.
we do.
Okay, so this is where you're going to need the notes section on your phone or a good old pen and paper. And you're going to grade yourself. If you strongly agree with a statement, you're going to give yourself 3 points. If you agree, it's 2 points. If you disagree, it's 1 point. And there are no points for strongly disagreeing. So the grumpy guy down the front, I'm really sorry, but no points for that strongly disagree. So we're going to race through. I'm going to say the statement twice, and then we're going to move on. And then at the end, there's a small maths challenge where you add up your score by calculating a percentage. And I'm not always hot on that, but I think we've got faith. So let's do it. The first area of technology. We have the required technical infrastructure, tools and development approach to meet our objectives. So thinking about your organisation, we have the required technical infrastructure, tools and development approach to meet our objectives. Moving on to channels and devices. We communicate with users strategically across web, email, social media, and paid advertising, taking into account different devices. So this is about communicating with users strategically across those channels and factoring in devices like mobile, tablet, etc. Audiences. We have defined and accepted audience segments based on user attributes, behaviours and analytics, and tailor our digital offer to these audiences. So do you strongly disagree to strongly agree around tailoring offer to your audiences? User experience, halfway point. We provide relevant and personalised experiences to our users and optimise this through an ongoing programme of testing. So are you thinking about user experience and making it better through testing? Content. We create and manage discoverable, useful and engaging digital content that meets our users' needs. Discoverable means people can find it, probably using search engines. So is your content discoverable, useful and engaging? Campaigns. We launch and manage the digital aspects of fundraising, marketing and influencing campaigns integrated with other teams. If your organisation doesn't focus on fundraising, that's okay. You might think about other marketing and those types of campaigns. But do you launch and manage the digital aspects of campaigns integrated with other teams? Analytics, we're nearly towards the end. Our analytics data is available, used and understood throughout the organisation, and we have automated reporting and data distribution where applicable. So is your data available, used and understood throughout your organisation? Governance. We have digital expertise within the senior leadership team and board of trustees, and these groups support and understand the strategic importance of the digital function. So thinking about those digital skills at the highest level of the organisation in senior leadership team and board of trustees. Are they supportive? Do you strongly agree to strongly disagree? And if you've got all that, hopefully you can add up a total Obviously, it's going to be 3 times 8, giving you 24. 24 divided by 24 times 100, that's obviously 100% maturity. I can do that percentage. You might need to open up the calculator function of your mobile phone to finish that off. But I will leave that with you. You can jot that down, take that away, and follow up. The digital maturity matrix is going to continue to live. It's got a new home with NCVO, and they're going to be adding to it and adding more functionality. But obviously really excited to hear any questions. If you want to follow up with me on any of this stuff, I always like to talk about digital maturity. I'd love to hear your scores, if you want to tell me now or afterwards, and those are all my details there. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Jo. Thank you. That was really fascinating and useful. I look forward to sharing our scores with my colleagues from Hospice House to see if we agree. And I'm sure you guys feel free to talk about your scores when you have questions. So I'm going to start with a question from Jamie, our very hardworking social media manager, editor, who is going to either give us his own question, I don't know if you've done the score for us, Jamie, and questions that have come from social media.
I haven't, unfortunately, done our own score so far, Sue. I think just one observation to start with is that, to use a digital phrase, the engagement rate for this session has been extremely high across social media. Kudos to Charlotte Whitridge and Barbara Geller in particular, who've been tweeting away avidly, and there are some video clips from this session on our Twitter feed as well, which hopefully you'll be able to digest as we go through. Ironically, one other observation I was going to make before I ask a question is one that came through from social media as this session was going on from another session, oddly enough. Because Claire Cardy, who's the chief executive from Eleanor, made a very valid point when she was tweeting about another presentation that she was seeing about there being lots of pictures of buildings. And obviously, one of the things that we've been discussing here is how we tell the story of people. And that it was a very interesting observation that Claire was making about how we sometimes, and I'm guilty of this as much as anyone else, gets hung up about making a lovely photograph of a building without telling the story of the people inside it. So that was a very interesting observation that Claire was making from another presentation, and I think there was a real synergy between what she was saying and what we were saying inside this auditorium. I suppose the question I have for you, Zoe, is obviously a great admirer of the work that you do. One of the challenges, obviously, that we have and hospices have is getting people started, as you say, to just do it. What would be your key message to people who are more reluctant into getting into digital and just get them over that precipice and get them started on digital?
I think that's a really excellent question, Jamie. Thank you. What I always start with is you almost need to put digital to one side and find out what really excites and motivates those people and gets them out of bed in the morning. So, for example, there's a charity that we're working with at the moment. I can't name who they are, but they're incredibly proud of their brand and they're incredibly proud of their comms and their marketing. So we're going to go in there and work with them on their digital transformation using those areas as a bit of a Trojan horse to get them feeling more confident with digital. So you need to start with who these people are and what really drives and motivates them, what they feel confident about, and then bring digital into it and show them how they can use digital to do all that stuff even more effectively. So it could be something like they're very proud of their track record as a fundraiser, and then show them how they could use digital channels in order to achieve even more. So you need to start with who they are, what's going to motivate them and their comfort zone, and then stretch them.
Thank you. Jo?
Yeah, I think it's such a good point. It is, rather than planning the digital transformation for the end of the budget year to come, actually what can you do on Monday? So I would say that. I would think of one thing around digital that you can do on Monday when you get back to the office. And just do that. And
I might add, I think it's also about building on success. So when you see that that's working and you've gathered the stats, the analytics are, that's one of the amazing things about digital. you can see how people are engaging, as Jamie is saying. You can look at the stats, you can understand trends, share those with colleagues, share those with your board, and get them excited about the success of that and what that's achieving. Other questions? We've got time for, let's say, 2 or 3 questions.
Hello, thank you all for your presentation. It's been really interesting. I'm Emilita Robbins and I'm the Chief Executive of Jersey Hospice Care. We use social media extensively for fundraising and for promoting some of our campaigns. I'm really interested to hear the suggestion that we should be also promoting how we can help our patients or service users. And I'm interested in whether you think you should distinguish the channels in which you put out different campaigns and different pieces, because I'm not sure where it would sit. I can understand doing short presentations perhaps through YouTube, but it would be a little bit at odds with our Facebook strategy.
Yeah, I can take that. So I think it's a really good area to be looking into for sure. When I was at Breast Cancer Care, we found that Twitter was where we engaged with partners, politicians, fundraisers, not necessarily so much where we engage with people affected by breast cancer. And a lot of that community support, discussion, sharing happened on our Facebook page. So naturally we could see that if we had a fundraising message, sure, we could occasionally share those, and we would on Facebook as well, but predominantly those would be on Twitter. So if you've got an engaged presence on different social media channels that's already working for you for fundraising, you might want to think about a different channel or an alternative space for that. And YouTube might be a great place to try, but certainly starting with that user research, talking to people, where are your audience, where would they like to see that information, being open to try one platform and one approach, look at the data, see if that's working. You can try it and see if it works, and then build from there.
Thank you. Do you want to add?
I think Jo's absolutely right about that. It all starts with your audience. So once you've got that baseline and that data of how your audience is using these channels already, then you need to design your content strategy around that. I wouldn't start with, say, just doing something on a channel. It's really about getting under the skin of what your users want and how you can help them on those channels. That should be the exam question there.
Thank you. Several people, microphone 2. Yes.
Mike Reeder, Senior Chaplain and Family Service Lead at St Luke's Hospice. I found today really exciting because I've followed a number of hospices on Twitter and other media. But one of the things I find very interesting working with our patients, and I can't find much about this, is how as hospices we deal with digital legacy, and how we have many people who come with Facebook and all sorts of things like that and don't know what to do with it. I don't know whether much work has been done in the hospice movement for this, and whether the experts have found that this has been done in other places.
So would that be people
who are dying and have got their Facebook page, and it becomes what? Yeah.
I think it's something really powerful, because we saw that with a lot with women who have secondary breast cancer as part of my work in my previous role, and often those profiles would stay up and they would become a place for memorial, and it's a very new contemporary thing. We have not seen this in the past, but we've always left presence behind. This is a new presence, and I think it may be an area to innovate around. We've seen things like online memorial books where you can share photos, imagery, and even donations for somebody, and there's a lot around giving in memory. So there may be ways that we can think about how to use that in a way to honour people, a way to remember them, and a way to keep their legacy alive in a really positive way. But I think it's a really great point.
Something to raise it. I didn't know where else to raise it. Thank you.
Yeah. And it's something that came up in the Dying Matters breakfast session we had yesterday, is thinking about when you are talking to the public about advanced care planning and what they're doing to think about their funerals or their wills, also including their digital legacy as part of that. Which is perhaps a good topic to explore a bit further in maybe next year's conference. Zoe, do you want to add?
I know Facebook have done some really interesting work in that area, and I saw their team present about it a little while ago. I think it was actually present at Facebook, and I was quite impressed by how they were handling a lot of the very difficult issues very sensitively. So do take a look at what they're doing about it, because I think they've done a lot of really good thinking in that area.
Thank you. One last question, number 2.
Barbara Gale again. I think I disagree with slightly about perhaps using Facebook with different channels, because we have a Facebook page which is for our community. And on there we post about events, we post about care, we post about job applications, volunteering, we've posted about deaths of key people, and we sort of work it with our community, because our community are made up of people who are going to die as well as people who are going to support us. And I think it's become a really good way of communicating with them.
I tend to agree with that. I'm not such a fan of having lots of different, say, Twitter accounts that do different things, because I think if you have one and tell people a bit about the different parts of your work, whether you're recruiting for a new post or having a fundraising event or put on a new service or developing a new service, I think it helps people to get a sense of the whole organisation, not just to see one part of it that they might have been in touch with. So I'm a big fan of that. But I think it's true that it's about thinking about how then your audience relates to that content, and digital analytics, we can find out if people are using that information.
That could be a topic in itself, because I think my point was really, if you build a community around one thing, which is fundraising, and then introduce a new topic in there, then that may grate and you may alienate that existing audience. So it really is all about that audience research. If you're starting from now and you don't have any social presence, then I would start with it all, because then you build a community that understands you as a multifaceted organisation. Just one size does not fit all in this space. So.
Good point. So I'm going to start wrapping up the session. Sue,
before you close, just a quick comment on digital legacies.
Yes, go for it.
I'm not on commission, but my stand is beside a great guy called James, and he specialises in digital legacy. So if you want to find out more, go to James, and he's got his iPad there, and he will be very happy to speak to you about protecting your digital legacy.
Brilliant, and thanks very much. That was really helpful intervention. Thank you. So I've learned tons. I'm sure you have, and I hope you have too. I think we've learned about what happens if you don't embrace digital. We've looked at what it takes to go from couch to marathon to being an Olympian. We've looked at what being a digitally grown-up organization takes. I thought it was really interesting to talk about, thinking about how we overcome our nervousness by sharing. The safety in numbers point was really important. And also reminding everyone and continue to look at how investment pays off, and starting small, but measuring how we do and learning from that and then building from there feels pretty important. And then I think, for me, the main point to keep coming back to is that we come back to our mission, to what we're there to do, to digital, not for its own sake, a point that was made by my colleague in Huddersfield. It's not about just digital because it's fun. It's not just about building a shiny new website. It's about what it's going to achieve for the people we're here to support. And I'm just going to finish off asking Jo and Zoe just to leave us with one last point, one takeaway point for all of us. Who wants to start? Go for it.
I think the starting point has always got to be your audience. So looking at how they're using these channels, what they want, what's keeping them awake at night, what their goals are, what they're trying to do. And once you've got that really deep understanding of how they are using all these different areas, then I find that unlocks everything, and that's great for building confidence in your organisation with digital.
So start with your audience. And Jo?
Well, I've got to say, measure your digital maturity and go on and have a look at digitalmaturity.co.uk and give that a go.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much. We've had such a fascinating session. Thank you so much, Zoe. And thanks for all of your engagement and questions.